Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. My name is Lauren Fields, and I'm glad you could join us today. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping announcements. As program attendees, you are all muted. We welcome questions at any time, and we'll answer as many as possible later in the program. In order to ask a question, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen at any time during today's program. If you're on a phone or tablet, the button may appear in the upper right corner, or you might need to swipe to find it. This program is being recorded and will be made available on the INLUS website. To start us off, I have to tell everyone why I'm super excited to be moderating this talk today. The INLUS offers virtual Icelandic language classes for anyone who's interested. These classes meet during the week and have optional Sunday study sessions to review the previous week's material and ask questions. A group of us who went through the Basic Icelandic 2 class decided to continue to meet virtually after that class had completed and help each other with our individual language learning goals. This group then evolved into a reading group where participants practice reading comprehension, speaking through reading aloud, and translation. We recently resumed after a summer break and have started reading Audiobook together. Today, we are thrilled to have with us Karítas Pálsdóttir, the author of Audiobook and the recently released Dagatal, and we're so happy that she's with us today. Our reading group so far has only scratched the surface of Audiobook, but we're really excited to have you here. Karitas is the author of 2 flash fiction collections for adult learners of Icelandic as a second language. Audiobook, published in 2020, and Dagatal, which was released this year. The stories are written in easy language and are marked by levels of difficulty on a scale from 1 to 6. Karitas is currently doing a PhD in creative writing at the University of East Anglia in England. Previously, she completed a master's in creative writing and a bachelor's degree in Icelandic with Japanese as a minor, both from the University of Iceland. Thank you so much, Karitas, for taking the time to meet with us today. I'd welcome you to introduce yourself and tell us what inspired you to write these 2 collections for Icelandic language learners.
Thank you so much for inviting me today. Yes, why did I start writing stories in easy language? The reason is because I saw a gap in the literature after having studied languages myself and used stories in easy language in my own language education. And then moving on to teaching Icelandic as a second language, I saw that there wasn't that much material similar to what I had been using in language learning myself for the Icelandic market. So I thought, why not combine my interest of the Icelandic language and the literature, the grammar, but also the creative writing aspect. So Audiobook is based on the thesis of my master's in creative writing. And then I went on to write more stories because I was far from having written down all of the ideas that and things that I wanted to share through the medium after Audiobook came out. So that's how Dagatal came into being then. It was only, I think, a month or 2 after Audiobook was published that I wrote the first stories of Dagatal. So they were written in a few months or 1.5 year period before the publishing process then started.
Oh, wow. So lots of ideas and couldn't stop at just one. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about Dagatal. Audiobook translates to seasons, and the book is divided into 4 sections, 1 for each season. And Dagatal translates to calendar. What can we expect for the progression of the stories in Dagatal?
Yes, so with Audiobook, there was this theme of the seasons, and then moving from the 4 seasons, I thought it fit to move over to the 12th month. So that's how the stories are divided into 12 chapters in Dagatal from January to December. And so again, you can read through the year stories that fit the seasons, but this time with a focus on the months. And the theme of Dagatal is the festivities, the calendar days, like the red days, the holidays, and the curious ways Icelanders celebrate things. So it's not necessarily only Icelandic holidays, but how we have our own touch on them, curious food, or just any normal day activities as well. And what happens in Dagatal as well is that there's a one added difficulty level. So there's a difficulty level 1 to 5 in Árstíðir, but for more advanced readers, there's a few stories that may be a bit more challenging in Dagatal. So it helps readers to grow as well into the second book.
Oh, interesting. A question on that. So I know that the stories within the books translate to the European language scale of, it's like A2 to B2. Is that correct?
Yes. So the European language scale has 6 steps. It's the A1, and then A2, B1, B2, and then C1 and C2. Árstíðir is on the 2 and 3, so the A2 to B1, but there's an added level of difficulty in Dagatal, so it reaches the B2 in the second book.
Okay, that was going to be my question of how with the 1 to 5 scale and now the 1 to 6 scale, how that translated with the European language scale. So roughly.
Yes, so when I decided to, before I started writing Árstíðir, I looked at the level, so what my readers, so my intended reader was the A2 to B1 readership that has some basic knowledge in the language already. But it's a wide scale because you move from things that are quite close to you to being able to speak and understand a more broader scale of topics already in those 2 steps. So to make it more accessible to the readers, I created my own scale in collaboration with my supervisors, and that's the 5 or 6 level scale within the A2 to B1, B2, because that's quite a broad scale in itself.
Thanks for clarifying that. Yes, we were noticing the different levels of the different stories as we've just started going through Árstíðir together, and we talked a little bit about that in our reading group on Sunday. Yes. I wanted to. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just curious to know when you're reading it whether you pick up on the difficulty levels right away as you're pointing to. You could see that in the text itself, but I decided to kind of hide a bit the difficulty levels by having it also visually pleasant. So it's like a decoration. These icons, one for, yes, so 2 icons there because it's on level 2 and 4. So it's quite gentle the way it's suggested. So you can easily miss it, but that's to be part of the fun. So you should just enjoy the ride. But if you want to read the book by difficulty levels, you can pick your way through it and use the list at the back of the book that lists the stories by difficulty levels.
Yes, we picked up on that as well, and in that it is well hidden because we didn't notice it our first week, the very first time that we came together as a group to discuss some of the stories, and it wasn't until this past week that we kind of started piecing some of this together. Oh, okay, and seeing how you scattered the different difficulties as well. So you don't start off the book at the easiest level and progress through. It does seem to be more random, and I gather that was intentional.
Yes, that was very much intentional. And the idea is that it should be a pleasant read, and so the stories are presented in a thematical order, so by the seasons, not by difficulty level. And my hope behind that is that it maximizes the enjoyment you get out of reading, even though this is an easy language and therefore a study tool for many, by then not having it set up in a way that makes grammatical sense with difficulty levels in order. My hope is that readers then just pick up on titles that they find interesting and browse through the book, reading what catches their eye rather than what logic says they should read next.
I'm glad you brought up learning through this and working through it, because I do understand that there's a companion workbook coming out soon for Audiobook. So I have two questions on that. So this would be a companion book to work through, as if you're taking each book as each story as a lesson, or using the book in a teaching setting. So my two questions are, do you know when the workbook will be available? And then are you similarly working on a workbook for Dagatal?
So the workbook for Palsdottir is in the editing stages. So I'm hoping it will very soon move to the stages of layout, and then soon afterwards to being printed. So hopefully within the next couple of months, but the date has not been set yet. But I will announce it as soon as that's something definite on both the Facebook page and the Instagram page, Palsdottir Sögur. But yes, the idea with the workbook is that you read one story from the book, and then you look at the vocabulary, you look at some thematic topics that will help you both with speaking and with writing exercises. And then there's some listening exercises, and an accompanying ebook will follow, which has an additional material for teachers and games, so interactive learning games that are thematically linked to the stories in the book, and can be fun in a classroom setting, or when people get together and have others to practice with. Yes. So
do you hear that, reading group? We've got games coming to us. I'm very excited. Our Sunday nights got even more fun.
Yes. So learning should be fun. So that's hopefully something that will be a good addition to learning through reading fiction, to have those interactive games as well. It helps with pronunciation and speaking practice. When it comes to Dagatal, I have not started working on a workbook, so who knows? But at the moment, I'm focusing on other things, so I don't see that in the near future.
I'm gonna take us back kind of to how you came to write these books, and I wanted to ask that you've lived in a lot of different places. You're currently doing your PhD in England. You have a minor in Japanese, and so I was wondering how your personal travels and living these different places influenced your writing.
Yes, I've been very fortunate to live in several countries and learn the languages spoken there, and through that get to know the culture. And there's no doubt about it, that really has influenced my worldview, and yeah, it's part of my experience, part of my identity. So of course that affects me as a writer as well. Topic wise, or to the content of Palsdottir and Dagatal, I think it results in a slightly different view that I have on the Icelandic culture than maybe people that have only lived in Iceland and never abroad. So it's the guest's eye, or the eye of the person that goes away and comes back. So it becomes easier to see the quirky things, or the things that might be curious to others. But it's also, yeah, has helped me understand that when you're learning a language, it's really important to get that support, because I needed that support myself when I lived abroad. And it's very nice to be able to learn about a culture through what you're reading. So that's something I've aimed at, to be aware of Icelandic values and stories, and try to not only help readers increase their Icelandic literacy grammatically and linguistically, but also culturally. So the cultural literacy of, yeah, getting a bit more background on what life is like in Iceland.
That's great. I really appreciate it. I wanted to talk now. I mean, so these collections are impressive, not only that in that you've written now over 200 short stories between the two books, which is a feat unto itself. But what struck us in reading Audiobook is that you present a range of different styles in each of the individual stories. You've got, and not just in terms of the narrative, but in terms of how the stories are structured as well. So you have some narratives, some dialogues that we, the reader, could sometimes interpret as being overheard conversations, maybe, or as an outsider looking into a scene, and some poems. And we also noted last week that some stories are written in the first person, as though we're one of the characters in the story participating in the dialogue, and other times the stories are written in the third person, so we can feel like that outsider looking in. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about this in terms of what you were thinking in terms of how you were varying these styles, and how you chose which style to use for a given story.
Well, on some level, all of it was very intentional, but then also part of it is intuitional as well. Because I did mark up and clearly make decisions about different styles. I wanted it to be varied topic-wise and structure-wise, because the thing I know about Icelandic language learners, or people who benefit from reading easy language in general, is that they're as different as they're many. So they might not have anything in common except the need for easy language. So we're talking about people on very different age groups, but also with their very different backgrounds and interests. And I wanted to try to write something that could interest a wide audience. So some of the stories are dramatic while others are funny, and so on. But also structure-wise, the first person is considered easier because you start learning about yourself, and then the third person more difficult. So I also wanted to have a variation in the language structure itself. But then on a more creative level, the creative writer in me just felt that some stories would be better told as short poems of sorts, or as a dialogue that could just focus on what's being said rather than what's happening around it. So it then comes down to the action of the story, which form benefits the the message or the punchline or the story that each story is trying to get across.
Oh, that's interesting. And I really did love the idea of us, the reader, kind of overhearing some of these conversations, because I, you know, so much of a big part of language learning is being able to recognize things in context, hearing the conversations that are happening around you in the checkout line at Netto, or in my case, I picked up a lot sitting at the faculty lunch table at the University of Akureyri, just hearing people talk over and around me was really something that helped expose me to things. So I loved seeing this in book format of like these. I was reading the stories that I might otherwise overhear.
I haven't thought about it that way, but I enjoy that take on it because I very much have that experience as well as a language learner. It's nice to be in an environment where you're not necessarily on the spot all the time, so you don't necessarily have to be in an active conversation, but like you say, you can just listen and engage in that way, just soak it in, and that's also very valuable to improve listening skills and get an understanding of vocabulary and context. So I hope, it's nice that some of that also comes across on the page. So that's nice.
Well, I would like to invite people who are listening today, if you do have questions for Karitas, please put them in the Q&A box and we'll ask them. Is there anything else that you'd like us to know about Dagatal before I turn to the Q&A box? I see that there's a couple in there now.
Other things you need to know about Dagatal? I don't know. The first thing that comes to mind is just that even though there's slightly fewer stories, the book is actually thicker. So there are some stories that are slightly longer in Ástir, and it reflects on the sixth and most difficult level, I guess.
Okay. So we have a question here on what's the inspiration for your stories. So we talked about your inspiration to write this book, but in terms of where do you draw the inspiration? As we said, you've got just 100 stories per book practically for each of these. So that's a lot of ideas. Is it from life experience or imagination, or where are you drawing the ideas from for these collections?
It's a mixture, a good mixture of things I overhear, just daily life, also lived experience, but then also imagination. And it's fun with the easy language that writing it, I had to think a bit more about what's close to me, because when you're learning a language, you start learning vocabulary and grammar structures that make sense to you exploring the world. So that's also a bit of the take, partly limitations, but it's also so much you can explore within those frames. So starting with the personal experience, what you as an individual see and do, and how you interact with the close world around you. So I drew some inspiration from my life, but also from things I overheard from other people's lives, some things that I read about both in fiction and in newspapers, and just things that rang true to the daily life experience.
Thank you. I've got a comment here from Jim. I just read the story Kver. Hilarious. Can you tell us your inspiration for that one? I love how you let us know about the dual meaning of the word Kver.
Well, this is a joke that gets tiresome really quickly. But the dual meaning of Kver is that it can both be who, the pronoun who, but also like a geyser, what the hot spring. So that's the dual meaning. And there's this Icelandic joke that I wrote out or made into this scene in Dagatal, where they have this conversation where they're each talking across each other. So one is making a joke by keeping this double meaning, but the other one just is fixed on one of the meanings. So it creates an interesting misunderstanding.
I can't wait to read it. Another question, are you thinking of or planning additional similar texts once you're a bit less busy? You meant you're in the process of your PhD right now, and we talked a little bit at the start before everyone else joined on, and that you may have some ideas.
Yes, I do have more ideas, and I'd love to keep writing for, within this same idea of writing easy language fiction. So yeah, I do have a few stories that haven't been published yet. So yeah, I'm collecting more stories, and hopefully they'll make up a collection again in the future.
I had another question on kind of the availability in the different formats. So in our reading group, we decided to pick up Audiobook for this fall. We just made that decision pretty early, so that allowed everyone enough time to get a copy, because at least at that time you could only get a physical copy from Iceland. But we were pleased to see that we could get it on Kindle. And so my first question is, do you have a sense for how widely available Dagatal is? Is it also available on Kindle, or will I have to plan a trip to Iceland to pick up my copy physically?
Yes, so Audiobook is out of stock at the moment, but it's being printed. So it will, hopefully come to Iceland in the next couple of weeks. So for a printed hard copy, or no, it's not a paperback copy, but yes, it's also available as an ebook on Kindle, but also as an ebook from the publisher Útgáfuhús.is in Útgáfuhús. And yes, then there's an audiobook version of Audiobook as well, which can be bought through the publisher's website, Útgáfuhús.is. And then you can download it onto your computer or preferred app and listen to it there. There's 12 different readers that read it, so it gives a very, very good scale of how different voices sound when they speak Icelandic. So there's 2 children, so with softer, brighter voices, and then people at different age levels and with different backgrounds. There's 2 people with Icelandic as a second language, so you also can hear what non-native Icelandic speakers sound like. So all of it to help you tune your ear to listening to different versions of Icelandic, spoken Icelandic.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that was my next question was, is there an audiobook available, or will there be one? And so this is really exciting, because in our previous books that we've read, and there have been audiobooks available, and we did note just how useful it is to be able to hear it spoken by people not in this self-run group for language learners. So this is really exciting, and I'm sure a number of us will be checking that out after this webinar.
Yes, I hope it's beneficial to listen and even read at the same time. So that's something, a good learning strategy, really. Yes, but you asked about Dagatal. At the moment, Dagatal is only available in paperback, but will soon be available as an ebook through the publishing house as well.
Great, that's good to know. So you also served as a mentor at the Icelandic Writers Retreat this year, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that experience in terms of the retreat itself, and also your experience as a mentor for that retreat.
Well, to clarify, I was a volunteer, not a mentor, so I was not contributing to the classes, but I was there as a one of the hosts in a way. So it was a really great opportunity to engage with attendees and help people find the right classrooms and help the faculty that came from all over the world to find what they needed in Reykjavik and help them get a good, pleasant stay. And I've volunteered a few times, so it's nice to be able to return, and it's a very inspiring atmosphere to be amongst so many writers and enthusiastic readers and get recommendations and inspiration from each other. So that has been very valuable.
I have a question kind of about that. So the question in the chat is, I recently heard from another Icelandic author, and she noted that there are government grants to assist writers. Is that something that you were all able to take advantage of? Is the government really that supportive of writers and other artists in Iceland?
There are writers' grants, yes. I have not gone the traditional route yet, so I haven't applied for those grants that they speak of, I guess. But I was lucky to get grants for my books, but through untraditional routes because of the teaching aspect and the more linguistic and grammatical purposes of teaching or having easy language material available for people learning Icelandic. So one of those grants that I was fortunate to get was from the Icelandic Equality Fund. So they're supporting different projects that help promote equality in Iceland.
Very neat. I have a comment received in the Q&A box from Laurel saying, I'm enjoying the stories in your book and the built-in bookmarks on the inside covers. Personally, I'm using a postcard from when I was there.
Oh, that's very sweet too. I'm glad the flips, or what it's called, are useful as bookmarks.
She also says, I love the idea of learning through playing games. During a recent language course in Iceland, games were used, and not only was it fun learning, but I thought it was very productive and enjoyable way to learn. Plus, it was very social in nature, which can only help the learning process along. I'm so glad to hear that you're planning on games for future instructional materials, and I think this could be very conducive to online learning as well. Looking forward to the workbook to enhance our learning strategies.
Thank you for that comment. That's great to hear. I agree with you that language games can be very beneficial. So I hope that the language games that I've adapted for the thematic purpose of tying together the stories in Ástir and then some special focus on different linguistic structures then helps in the language games to tie it all together.
I have another question, a reminder to folks, please put your questions and answers in the chat box. And Alicia, I may need you to clarify your question here. So the question is, how big was your edition? Is that, and like what was the print run for Ástríðar's? You mentioned Ástríðar's is currently sold out and they're doing another run, which congratulations for it being sold out.
Thank you. What's more unbelievable is that it's the third time that it's being printed now. So.
Oh, wow, congrats.
Thank you.
And Alicia, please feel free to type in if that wasn't your question, let me know, and we'll get it answered. So I don't see any more questions so far. I'm going to consult my my previously prepared list. I had a comment that we received also from our reading group that we would recommend to the publisher bigger margins so that we have more space to write notes. Obviously, you can take or leave that comment, but for those of us that like to write in our copies.
That is a good point.
But maybe, maybe the workbook will solve that problem.
Hopefully.
And okay, I have another question in the chat. It says, I too appreciate that flap. Everything about that book is so well thought out. I like the manageable size and feel of it too. I'm looking forward to the workbook as I'm keeping my copy pristine and not writing in it. So we're divided in the reading group on whether we want to write in it or not.
Oh, great. Thanks for sharing those different viewpoints.
Oh man, now it's becoming a reading group discussion session in the chat because we also have bigger margins and more space between lines for notes. But I think that just speaks to how much we are enjoying this book as we're going through it as a group. I think it is a book that I think anyone can pick up themselves and work through, but we've already had this standing Sunday evening reading group together and started going through this book, and it also just really lends itself well to having a discussion about the stories afterwards. The stories are so short, but I feel like there's too much crammed in into a relatively few number of paragraphs. So there's a lot to unpack and dissect within each individual story. And so that's been really fun.
Yes, I did do a word count for Ástir, how long the stories are. So they're from 60 to 600 words, but I haven't made a similar word count for Dagatal, but I'm assuming it's slightly larger.
Okay, I don't have any other questions in the chat. One thing that I wanted to ask kind of in a closing was what advice do you have for us language learners, myself included, new learners or those who may be a couple years or more into their language learning journey?
My advice is repetition and practice, but also exposure. But first and foremost, to have fun. Language learning should be fun, and all exposure to the language is good exposure. So it's really watching something in Icelandic is learning, it's practice. So watching Icelandic TV shows or movies, also listening to Icelandic radio or podcasts or music with Icelandic lyrics. All of this is exposure, but it should also be fun. So don't be afraid to mix up your methods and just get as much exposure as you can. So yeah, whether it's reading or watching or listening.
Another comment here in the chat, just echoing the comment made earlier about using games. And Alicia also was part of the language program over the summer, and she said learning at the Westfjords University Center was a great experience. Using games and prompts definitely helped us learn.
Great. Yes, I heard good things about the program in the Westfjords. I'm happy you had a good time.
And we have another comment from Susan. She says, I just read Finn Minjugrupper for next week's reading group. This story made me laugh too. Thank you for incorporating humor into these stories. I agree with you that learning should be fun, and we learn more when we are relaxed and enjoying the process.
Thank you, yes.
And another comment from Veronica. We'd love for you to keep building upon each book, putting in a plug for the future Mánuði og Vikur for Dagatal.
Yes, that'd be ideal.
But we do recognize you're a very busy woman right now in completing your studies is obviously your first priority. So we do understand that. But again, we're so happy that you're able to take the time today to meet with us and tell us about both of your books and the process that got us here today. So I may turn it over to you. Is there anything that we didn't discuss today that you'd like to make sure that we know about or aware about?
It's been a pleasure, a real pleasure to join you today and get to speak about the books. I think we've covered a great amount of information, and it's been wonderful for me to hear your feedback and thoughts on the books. It's very precious. One thinks before getting into the world of writing that authors hear from readers all the time that isn't true. So it's very nice to hear about your engagement with the stories. It's precious to me. But yes, we've mentioned where the books are available and the different formats they're available in. And I hope some of you will enjoy the audiobooks and the upcoming workbooks as well. And yes, I'll make sure to keep writing. I stick them in my drawer and hopefully they'll stack up and become a third collection one day.
Excellent. Yeah, I know that many of us will check out the audiobook. Could you tell us again where to find that? So that is from the publisher, correct?
Yeah, it's from the website the publisher has, utgavehus.is. I can type it up for you as well, so you can share it later. So when you go to the publisher's website, you'll have to look up books. So there's, if you look close enough, there's going to be a lot of yellow books with the with the Árstíðir yellow cover. And one of them is going to say Hljóðbók, audiobook. So Hljóðbók is the one where you can download an audiobook into your devices.
Oh,
and
great.
I don't think Storytel is accessible in North America, but if you happen to have access to Storytel, it's also available there.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one, but maybe others participating today are. Okay, I don't have any more questions in the chat, but I would like to thank you again so much for taking the time to meet with us today and tell us about your works and how you got to where you are today. And we're super excited to continue working our way through Árstíðir, but also now to also pick up Dagatal and keep looking at these fun little vignettes.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
So before we end today, I do want to let everyone know about our next program. Author Nancy Marie Brown will introduce her new book, which will be Looking for the Hidden Folk, How Iceland's Elves Can Save the Earth. And that will be on Monday, October 3rd at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. That's 5 p.m. Pacific. The webinar will be moderated by Carrie Kozabal. And Karitas, thank you again so much for speaking with us today. And thank you to all of the attendees who were able to join us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you have a great evening.